May 14, 1945, 05:57 in the morning. USS Enterprise, 75 miles off Kyushu, Japan. Commander Richard Crommelin, 38 years old, from Montgomery, Alabama, had just launched the Dawn Combat Air Patrol from Enterprise's flight deck when a lookout spotted them. 5 aircraft coming in low from the north, weaving through cloud cover at barely 200 feet above the water. Kamikazes, divine wind, Japanese pilots on one-way missions, their aircraft loaded with bombs and fuel, seeking to crash into American warships. Enterprise had faced them before. The ship's radar operators had detected the incoming aircraft minutes earlier. The Combat Air Patrol was already vectoring to intercept. The ship's anti-aircraft batteries were tracking the approaching threats. 4 of the Kamikazes were shot down by Combat Air Patrol fighters and anti-aircraft fire before reaching the carrier. But the 5th aircraft, a Yokosuka D4Y dive bomber, broke through the defensive screen. The pilot pushes aircraft into steep dive directly toward Enterprise's flight deck. The ship's 5-inch guns fired. Tracers from 40mm and 20mm guns converged on the diving aircraft. Hits sparkled along the wings and fuselage, but the aircraft kept coming, trailing smoke, the pilot dead or dying to controls but the dive trajectory already set. The Kamikaze struck Enterprise's forward elevator at 05:57. The impact was catastrophic. The aircraft's bomb detonated on contact, blowing the forward elevator platform completely off its mount and hurling it into the air. Fire erupted across the forward flight deck. Fragments from the explosion tore through spaces below the flight deck. 14 sailors died instantly. 68 were wounded. Crommelin, standing near the island superstructure, felt the ship shudder from the impact. Flames shot hundreds of feet into the air. Smoke billowed across the flight deck, obscuring visibility. For a moment, it appeared Enterprise might burn like the carrier struck at Coral Sea in Midway, like Franklin hit by bombs 2 months earlier, and nearly lost over 800 casualties. But Enterprise didn't burn out of control. The damage control parties, trained through years of combat, experience from previous battle damage, responded immediately. Firefighting teams attacked the flames with foam and water. Medical teams evacuated wounded. Repair parties shored up damaged structures and isolated fires before they could spread to fuel and ammunition stores. Within 3 hours, the fires were extinguished. Within 12 hours, temporary repairs allowed limited flight operations. Within 2 days, Enterprise was conducting full combat operations again, launching strikes against Japanese positions on Kyushu. This was Enterprise, the Gray Ghost, the carrier that Japan's Navy claimed to have sunk on 4 separate occasions but kept reappearing. The ship that participated in nearly every major carrier battle of the Pacific War. The warship that earned 20 battle stars, more than any other United States Navy ship in history. The carrier whose aircraft sank 71 enemy ships and destroyed 911 enemy aircraft. This is the story of the most decorated warship in United States naval history, of the carrier that survived when all her sister ships were sunk or scrapped, of the ship whose crew and aircraft changed the course of the Pacific War, and of the tragedy that saw America's most successful warship cut up for scrap in 1958, despite desperate attempts to preserve her as a memorial. USS Enterprise CV-6 was laid down at Newport News Shipbuilding in Virginia on July 16, 1934, as the second ship of the Yorktown-class aircraft carriers. The design represented United States Navy's attempt to create fleet carriers that balanced aircraft capacity, speed, protection, and cost within constraints of the Washington Naval Treaty. The treaty, signed in 1922, limited naval construction among major powers to prevent arms race following World War I. The United States was allowed to build carriers up to 135,000 tons total displacement. This constraint required careful design choices. Carriers needed to be large enough to operate meaningful air groups, but not so large that total numbers would be inadequate for Pacific operations. The Yorktown-class design compromised between competing requirements. The ships displaced approximately 20,000 tons standard, 25,000 tons full load. This was smaller than Lexington-class, carriers converted from battlecruiser hulls, but larger than earlier Ranger class. The size allowed each ship to operate approximately 90 aircraft, while maintaining speed sufficient to keep pace with fast battleships. The hull measured 809 feet 9 inches overall length with beam of 83 feet 3 inches at waterline. The flight deck measured 809 feet by 86 feet, providing adequate space for launching and recovering aircraft, while keeping overall dimensions within reasonable limits. The hangar deck below the flight deck could accommodate approximately half the air group under cover. with the remainder parked on the flight deck when needed. Propulsion consisted of 9 Babcock and Wilcox boilers feeding 4 Parsons geared turbines generating 120,000 shaft horsepower. This gave the ship's maximum speed of approximately 33 knots, fast enough to operate with battleship task forces and to generate wind over deck sufficient for launching heavily loaded aircraft. Armament for self-defense included 8 5-inch 38 caliber dual-purpose guns in single mounts. These weapons could engage both surface targets and aircraft, providing protection against destroyers and dive bombers. The design also included multiple quad-mounted 1.1-inch anti-aircraft machine guns, though these would prove inadequate and were later supplemented with 40mm and 20mm guns. Armor protection was minimal by battleship standards, but reasonable for carrier. Armored belt along waterline was 2.5 to 4 inches thick, sufficient to resist destroyer gunfire and fragments, but inadequate against battleship shells or aerial torpedoes. The hangar deck had 40 pounds per square foot armor plating above it, meant to protect machinery and magazines from bombs penetrating flight deck. Enterprise was launched October 3, 1936, and commissioned May 12, 1938. The ship cost approximately $45 million, expensive but not prohibitive. The design proved successful enough that a third Yorktown-class ship, Hornet, was ordered and completed in 1941. Enterprise spent her first 3 years conducting training operations, working up her air group, and participating in fleet exercises. The carrier operated primarily from San Diego, conducting operations along the Pacific coast, and occasionally deploying to Hawaiian waters. The ship's initial air group consisted of Grumman F-3F biplane fighters, Douglas TBD Devastator torpedo bombers, and Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers. The F-3FS were obsolete almost immediately, replaced in 1940 by Grumman F-4F Wildcat monoplanes. But the TBDs and SBDs would serve throughout the early war years, with SBDs proving extraordinarily successful despite their pre-war design. By 1941, tensions between the United States and Japan had escalated dramatically. Japanese expansion in China and Southeast Asia threatened American interests and allies. Economic sanctions against Japan, particularly oil embargoes, created crises that military planners on both sides recognized might lead to war. Enterprise was assigned to Pearl Harbor as part of the Pacific Fleet's carrier force. The ship conducted regular training operations, taking aircraft and pilots through repeated cycles of launches, recoveries, navigation exercises, and mock attacks. The training was intensive and sometimes dangerous. Carrier aviation in 1941 required skill and courage. Accidents were common, with aircraft crashing on landing or pilots misjudging approaches and going into the sea. In late November 1941, Enterprise embarked Marine Fighter Squadron 211 and transported the aircraft to Wake Island as reinforcement for the garrison there. This routine mission saved Enterprise from destruction. The carrier departed Pearl Harbor on November 28, 1941, and was scheduled to return December 6, but weather delayed the return. Enterprise was still at sea, approximately 200 miles west of Pearl Harbor, on the morning of December 7, 1941, when Japanese carrier aircraft attacked the Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. Enterprise learned of the attack through radio messages reporting Pearl Harbor under attack. The carrier immediately launched search planes to locate the Japanese fleet. Enterprise's aircraft found no carriers. Nagumo's task force had already withdrawn northward, but several Enterprise planes attempting to land at Pearl Harbor after dark were shot down by nervous American anti-aircraft gunners who couldn't distinguish friendly aircraft from potential Japanese attackers. Enterprise entered Pearl Harbor on December 8 to find the Pacific Fleet devastated. Battleships Arizona, Oklahoma, West Virginia, California, and Nevada were sunk or heavily damaged. Hundreds of aircraft destroyed. Over 2,000 sailors and Marines killed. The attack had crippled the Pacific Fleet's battleship force, but had missed the carriers, Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga. The 3 carriers assigned to Pacific Fleet had all been at sea and escaped destruction. This accident of timing meant the Pacific Fleet's carrier force survived intact. The carriers would bear the burden of the Pacific War's opening campaigns while the battleship force was rebuilt. The months following Pearl Harbor saw Enterprise participate in the first American offensive operations of the Pacific War. These were raids rather than invasions, hit-and-run attacks on Japanese positions designed to inflict damage, gather intelligence, and boost American morale during a period of otherwise continuous defeats. In February 1942, Enterprise joined with Yorktown to attack Japanese positions in the Marshall and Gilbert Islands. The carriers approached under cover of weather, launched strikes against Japanese bases on Kwajalein, Watch, and other atolls, then withdrew before Japanese land-based aircraft could respond effectively. The raids achieved limited material results. Some ships sunk, some aircraft destroyed, some facilities damaged. But the strategic impact was significant. They demonstrated that American carriers could strike Japanese positions and escape. They provided combat experience for pilots and crews who had never faced actual combat. They proved to both American and Japanese planners that carrier warfare would define Pacific operations. In April 1942, Enterprise participated in one of the war's most audacious operations, the Doolittle raid on Tokyo. The plan called for Army Air Forces B, 25 medium bombers to be loaded onto Carrier Hornet, transported to within striking distance of Japan, launched to attack Tokyo and other cities, then fly westward to land in China. The bombers couldn't land back on the carrier. They were too large and too fast, so the mission was effectively one way. Enterprise provided escort for Hornet during the approach to Japan. The two carriers, accompanied by cruisers and destroyers, steamed westward across the Pacific. On April 18th, approximately 650 miles from Japan, farther than planned, after Japanese patrol boats spotted the task force, Hornet launched 16 B-25s commanded by Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle. The bombers struck Tokyo and other targets, causing minimal physical damage but enormous psychological impact. The raid shocked Japanese leadership. The home islands weren't supposed to be vulnerable to attack. It forced Japan to retain fighters and anti-aircraft defenses in home islands rather than deploying them to combat zones. It demonstrated American ability to strike anywhere. Enterprise recovered none of the bombers. They flew to China as planned, with most crews surviving. But the carrier's role escorting Hornet and providing fighter protection was essential to the mission's success. Enterprise was not present at the Battle of Coral Sea in May 1942, the first carrier versus carrier battle in history. But the battle's outcome directly affected Enterprise's future operations. Yorktown and Lexington fought Japanese carriers attempting to invade Port Moresby, New Guinea. The tactical result was mixed. Lexington was sunk, Yorktown damaged. Japanese carrier Shoho sunk. Fleet carriers Yokosuka and Zuikaku damaged or depleted. But strategically, the Americans achieved success by stopping the invasion. More importantly for Enterprise, Coral Sea prevented Japanese carriers from participating in the upcoming Midway operation. Shokaku required repairs. Zuikaku had lost too many aircraft and pilots to operate effectively. This meant the Japanese attack on Midway would involve 4 carriers instead of 6, evening the odds for the American defenders. The Battle of Midway represented Enterprise's first major fleet engagement and arguably the most important carrier battle of the Pacific War. Admiral Yamamoto planned to lure the American carriers into decisive battle by attacking Midway Island, forcing the Pacific Fleet to respond. Yamamoto believed American carriers could be destroyed in circumstances favorable to Japanese forces. But American intelligence had broken Japanese naval codes. Admiral Nimitz knew Midway was a target and that the attack would come in early June. He concentrated all available carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and hastily repaired Yorktown, northeast of Midway, to ambush the Japanese fleet. Enterprise and Hornet, under Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance, departed Pearl Harbor May 28th. Yorktown, under Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher, departed May 30th after emergency repairs from Coral Sea damage. The 3 carriers rendezvoused at Point Luck, approximately 300 miles northeast of Midway, on June 2nd. June 4th, 1942, dawn clear with good visibility. Japanese carriers Akagi, Kaga, Hiryu, and Soryu launched strikes against Midway at dawn. American search plane from Midway located the Japanese carriers. Fletcher ordered strikes launched from all 3 American carriers. The attacks were poorly coordinated. American torpedo bombers attacked first, without fighter escort, and were slaughtered. Torpedo Squadron 8 from Hornet was wiped out completely. All 15 aircraft shot down. Only 1 pilot survived. Torpedo Squadron 6 from Enterprise lost 10 of 14 aircraft. Torpedo Squadron 3 from Yorktown lost 10 of 12 aircraft. The torpedo attacks achieved no hits and cost 41 aircraft and aircrew. But the torpedo attacks accomplished something crucial. They pulled Japanese combat air patrol down to low altitude, leaving Japanese carriers vulnerable to dive bombers arriving at high altitude. Enterprise's Scouting Squadron 6 and Bombing Squadron 6, 33 SBD Dauntless dive bombers under Lieutenant Commander Wade McClusky, arrived over the Japanese carriers at approximately 10:22 in the morning. McClusky had been searching for over an hour, his fuel running low, when he spotted the wake of a Japanese destroyer heading northeast at high speed. He followed the destroyer's course and found the Japanese carriers, Kaga and Akagi, conducting flight operations, their decks crowded with aircraft being fueled and armed. McClusky split his force. He led Scouting 6 against Kaga. Lieutenant Richard Best led Bombing 6 against Akagi. The dive bombers rolled into attacks from 14,000 feet, diving at steep angles, releasing 1,000-pound bombs at low altitude before pulling out. Kaga was hit by at least 4 bombs in rapid succession. The bombs detonated among aircraft on the hangar deck, igniting fuel and ammunition. Fire spread uncontrollably. Within minutes, Kaga was a burning wreck, abandoned by her crew and sinking. Akagi was hit by at least 1 bomb, possibly 2, that penetrated the flight deck and detonated in a hangar among armed and fueled aircraft. Like Kaga, Akagi erupted in flames that couldn't be controlled. The carrier was abandoned and later scuttled. Yorktown's dive bombers, arriving simultaneously with Enterprise's, attacked carrier Soryu. 3 bombs hit Soryu, causing similar catastrophic damage. Soryu burned and sank. In approximately 5 minutes, 3 of Japan's 4 carriers at Midway were destroyed. Only Hiryu remained operational. Hiryu launched counterstrikes that damaged Yorktown severely. Yorktown would eventually be sunk by a submarine while under tow, but Hiryu herself was located by Enterprise scout planes in the afternoon. Enterprise launched a second strike at approximately 3:30 in the afternoon. Lieutenant Earl Gallagher led 24 SBD dive bombers against Hiryu. 4 bombs hit the Japanese carrier, setting her ablaze like her sister ships. Hiryu was abandoned that evening and sank the next morning. Enterprise's aircraft had sunk 3 of 4 Japanese carriers at Midway and contributed to damaging the 4th. The battle was the turning point of the Pacific War. Japan lost 4 fleet carriers and many of her most experienced pilots. The numerical balance of carrier forces shifted to America's favor and would never shift back. The strategic initiative passed to the United States. The invasion of Guadalcanal in August 1942 opened the first major American offensive campaign of the Pacific War. Enterprise provided air support for the invasion and remained in the area for subsequent naval battles around the island. The Battle of the Eastern Solomons on August 24, 1942, saw Enterprise face Japanese carriers attempting to reinforce Guadalcanal. Enterprise aircraft located an attacked carrier Ryujo, contributing to her sinking. Japanese aircraft from carrier Shokaku attacked Enterprise in return. The Japanese attack was well executed and determined. Dive bombers broke through combat air patrol and anti-aircraft fire. 3 bombs hit Enterprise. The first bomb struck near the aft elevator, penetrating the flight deck and exploding inside. The second bomb hit near the island superstructure, causing casualties among gun crews. The third bomb hit near the forward elevator, starting fires. Enterprise absorbed the damage. Casualties were substantial, 74 killed, but the ship remained operational. Damage control parties contained fires and made temporary repairs. Enterprise continued operating aircraft even while under repair. The ship withdrew to Pearl Harbor for permanent repairs, but returned to combat within 6 weeks. On October 26, 1942, Enterprise participated in the Battle of Santa Cruz Islands. This was the 4th carrier battle of 1942 and demonstrated both Enterprise's resilience and the ferocity of carrier combat. Enterprise and Hornet faced Japanese carriers Shokaku, Zuikaku, and Zuho. Both sides launched strikes simultaneously. Enterprise aircraft attacked Shokaku, achieving bomb hits that forced the Japanese carrier to withdraw for repairs. Japanese aircraft attacked both American carriers. Hornet was hit by multiple bombs, torpedoes, and kamikaze attacks. Not yet officially organized kamikaze tactics, but damaged aircraft deliberately crashing into the carrier, and was so badly damaged she had to be abandoned and scuttled. Enterprise was also targeted. A bomb hit near the forward elevator, penetrating multiple decks before exploding, killing 44 sailors. Another bomb struck near the island. Anti-aircraft fire from Enterprise and escorting ships shot down many attackers, but the damage was severe. Yet again, Enterprise remained operational. The carrier conducted flight operations even while under repair, recovering aircraft from the sunken Hornet and launching combat air patrol. Enterprise was the only operational American carrier in the Pacific for several weeks following Santa Cruz. The ship's crew worked around the clock to maintain flight operations despite battle damage, keeping aircraft in the air while repair parties patched holes and cleared wreckage. By late 1942, Enterprise had acquired her legendary status as the Gray Ghost. Japanese propaganda had announced Enterprise sunk or destroyed on multiple occasions. After Eastern Solomons, Radio Tokyo announced Enterprise sunk. After Santa Cruz, Japanese news again claimed Enterprise destroyed. But the carrier kept reappearing in combat, launching strikes, recovering aircraft, fighting on despite damage that would have put lesser ships out of action. The nickname Gray Ghost came from both her paint scheme, the gray camouflage that all U.S. Navy ships carried, and her ability to appear, strike, and vanish before Japanese forces could destroy her. Japanese pilots and commanders grew frustrated at Enterprise's survival. The carrier seemed unkillable. Enterprise's crew embraced the nickname. They painted a cartoon ghost on the island's superstructure. They referred to their ship as the Gray Ghost with pride. The nickname represented their ship's durability and their own determination to keep fighting no matter what damage they sustained. Before we continue with how Enterprise fought through 1943 and 1944 campaigns, why our aircraft sank 71 enemy ships and destroyed over 900 aircraft, and how the most decorated United States warship was shamefully scrapped despite desperate preservation efforts. If you're fascinated by these stories of ships that survived against impossible odds, of crews who kept fighting through repeated battles and damage, of weapons that earned more decorations than any other, subscribe and hit the notification bell. We publish deeply researched military history documentaries every week that bring you the stories of ships, battles, and operations that shaped naval warfare. These are the vessels that don't get Hollywood movies, the achievements that deserve to be remembered alongside more famous names. Now back to 1943, and Enterprise's continued operations across the Pacific. Following repairs and modernization at Puget Sound Naval Shipyard, Enterprise returned combat in May 1943. The carrier participated in operations supporting the campaign up the Solomon Islands chain, providing air cover for amphibious landings and striking Japanese air bases. The strategic situation had changed dramatically since 1942. The United States now held numerical superiority in carriers. New Essex-class carriers were entering service, providing capability far exceeding early war designs. Enterprise was no longer the only operational carrier bearing the burden of Pacific operations. The carrier could rotate to rear areas for maintenance and upgrades without crippling American operations. But Enterprise remained in heavy demand. The ship's experienced crew, combat-proven air group, and reputation for reliability meant task force commanders preferred Enterprise when possible. The carrier participated in strikes against Marcus Island, Wake Island, and Tarawa in support of Central Pacific operations. In November 1943, Enterprise provided air support for the invasion of Tarawa. The operation demonstrated the brutal difficulty of amphibious assaults against fortified positions. Despite heavy naval bombardment and airstrikes, Japanese defenders inflicted severe casualties on Marines landing on BDO Island. Enterprise aircraft flew close air support missions, attacking defensive positions and providing cover for troops ashore. The Tarawa operation, while ultimately successful, showed that even overwhelming firepower couldn't guarantee easy victories. The lessons learned at Tarawa, longer preparatory bombardments, better coordination between naval gunfire and air support, improved amphibious tactics, will be applied in subsequent operations. January 1944 saw Enterprise participate in strikes against Kwajalein in the Marshall Islands. The operation demonstrated the growing power of American carrier task forces. Multiple carriers operating together could put hundreds of aircraft over targets simultaneously, overwhelming defenses through sheer weight of numbers. But Enterprise's most significant operation in 1944 came during the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June. This was the largest carrier battle of the Pacific War and resulted in catastrophic Japanese defeat. The Japanese plan called for carrier aircraft to attack American carriers supporting the Marianas invasion, then land at Guam to refuel and rearm before attacking again. The plan assumed American carriers could be destroyed through sustained attacks by numerically superior Japanese forces. The plan failed completely. American radar detected Japanese strikes while still far from the carriers. Fighter directors vector combat air patrol to intercept. Grumman F-6F Hellcat fighters, far superior to the Grumman F-4F Wildcats of early war, intercepted Japanese formations and massacred them. The one-sided aerial combat became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Enterprise fighters participated in the slaughter. Japanese aircraft fell in dozens, then scores, then hundreds. Of approximately 400 Japanese aircraft launched in strikes on June 19th, approximately 300 were shot down. American losses were fewer than 30 aircraft. Enterprise aircraft also participated in strikes against Japanese carriers the next day. American scout planes located the Japanese fleet late in the afternoon of June 20th. Admiral Mitchell launched strikes despite knowing aircraft would return after dark, requiring dangerous night landings. The strike sank carrier Ohio and damaged several other ships. The returning aircraft faced challenging night recoveries. Many aircraft ran out of fuel and ditched in the ocean, though most crews were rescued. Enterprise recovered aircraft throughout the night, her crew working under minimal lighting to avoid betraying position to Japanese submarines. The Battle of the Philippine Sea destroyed Japanese naval aviation as effective force. Japan lost over 600 aircraft and many of her remaining experienced pilots. The combined fleet would never again challenge American carriers in open battle with realistic hope of victory. The Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944 was the largest naval battle in history and saw Enterprise participate in multiple engagements over 4 days of combat. The Japanese plan was complex, involving multiple forces attacking from different directions to overwhelm American forces supporting the Philippines invasion. The plan relied on using Japanese carriers as decoys to lure American carriers away from invasion beaches, allowing Japanese battleships to destroy amphibious forces. The decoy plan worked tactically, but failed strategically. Admiral Halsey, commanding 3rd Fleet, including Enterprise, took the bait and pursued Japanese carriers northward, leaving San Bernardino Strait undefended. This allowed Japanese battleships to approach invasion beaches, but they were driven off by desperate resistance from destroyers and escort carriers before inflicting serious damage. Enterprise participated in the battle off Cape Engano, the carrier action in northern Philippine Sea. American carriers located Japanese decoy force, carriers Zuikaku, Zuho, Chitose, and Chiyoda, on morning of October 25th. The Japanese carriers had few aircraft aboard. Most had been sent to land bases and couldn't defend themselves effectively. Enterprise launched multiple strikes throughout the day. American aircraft sank all 4 Japanese carriers and several escorts. Zuikaku, the last survivor of the Pearl Harbor attack force, rolled over and sank in the afternoon, struck by multiple bombs and torpedoes from Enterprise and other carriers. Leyte Gulf effectively ended the Japanese Navy as strategic force. Japan lost 4 carriers, 3 battleships, 10 cruisers, and numerous other vessels. The combined fleet could no longer contest American naval supremacy. Future Japanese operations would rely on suicide tactics, kamikazes, rather than conventional naval combat. The kamikaze threat intensified dramatically in early 1945 as American forces approached Japan itself. Japanese aircraft, often obsolete types unsuitable for conventional combat, were loaded with bombs and fuel and deliberately crashed into American ships. The tactic was terrifyingly effective. A single kamikaze hit could cripple or sink ships that could withstand multiple conventional bomb hits. Enterprise faced increasing kamikaze attacks during operations off Okinawa and strikes against the Japanese home islands. The ship's anti-aircraft batteries, massively expanded since 1942, shot down many attackers. But some kamikazes inevitably broke through. On April 11, 1945, a kamikaze penetrated Enterprise's defenses and struck the carrier's port side near the waterline. The impact and explosion killed 13 sailors and wounded 68. Flooding was contained, and Enterprise continued operations after temporary repairs. On May 14, 1945, the kamikaze attack, described in the opening, severely damaged Enterprise's forward elevator. The attack killed 14 and wounded 68. The damage was extensive enough that Enterprise withdrew to Puget Sound Naval Shipyard for repairs. The repairs took until the end of hostilities. Enterprise was still in the shipyard when Japan surrendered in August 1945. The carrier missed the final operations of the war, but had already compiled a record unmatched by any other ship. Enterprise's combat record exceeded that of any other United States Navy ship in World War II. The carrier participated in 18 of the 22 major naval engagements in the Pacific Theater. Enterprise was present at Midway, Eastern Solomons, Santa Cruz, Philippine Sea, Leyte Gulf, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, the defining carrier battles of the war. The 20 battle stars awarded Enterprise represented recognition for participation in major campaigns and battles. For comparison, the next most decorated ship, light cruiser USS San Diego, earned 18 battle stars. No other ship matched Enterprise's record. Beyond battle stars, Enterprise's aircraft achieved extraordinary results. The carrier's air group sank or contributed to sinking 71 enemy ships during the war. These included carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, submarines, and numerous transport and auxiliary vessels. Enterprise aircraft also destroyed 911 enemy aircraft in air-to-air combat and strikes on airfields. The human cost of achieving this record was substantial. Enterprise lost approximately 300 aircraft during the war to all causes: combat losses, operational accidents, ditchings. Pilot and aircrew casualties numbered in the hundreds, though exact figures are difficult to determine, as aircrew personnel rotated frequently between ships and shore bases. The ship's crew suffered approximately 500 casualties killed or died of wounds during the war. These casualties came primarily from kamikaze and conventional bomb hits that penetrated the ship's defenses. Many more sailors were wounded but survived, receiving medical treatment aboard ship or at shore facilities. Life aboard Enterprise during wartime was demanding and dangerous. The ship's complement varied throughout the war, but typically included approximately 2,500 officers and enlisted men. These sailors maintained the ship's machinery, operated weapon systems, handled aircraft, prepared food, provided medical care, and performed thousands of other tasks necessary to keep a carrier operational. The work was continuous. Carriers conducted flight operations during daylight and maintained watch through the night. Machinery required constant maintenance. Weapons needed cleaning and testing. Aircraft needed servicing between missions. The crew worked in shifts, maintaining 24-hour operations, catching sleep when possible in crowded berthing spaces. Combat added immense stress. Air raids meant hours at general quarters, manning battle stations, waiting for attacks that might or might not come. When attacks did come, the experience was terrifying. Aircraft diving toward the ship, bombs falling, anti-aircraft guns firing continuously, explosions shaking the vessel, casualties mounting. Between battles, the routine continued. The carrier operated aircraft for training, conducted exercises, took on supplies, made repairs. Shore leave, when available, provided brief respite, but opportunities for rest were limited. The Pacific Theater offered few developed ports where large numbers of sailors could go ashore safely. The crew took pride in their ship and her record. They knew Enterprise was special. They knew their ship had survived battles that sank or crippled other carriers. They knew they served on the most decorated warship in the Navy. This pride sustained morale through extended deployments and repeated combat. Veterans remembered Enterprise as a lucky ship. Despite suffering battle damage on multiple occasions, the carrier always survived. Damage control was excellent. The crew was experienced. The ship herself seemed to resist destruction. Many sailors who served on Enterprise felt the ship would never be sunk, that the gray ghost was charmed. Enterprise underwent multiple modernizations and upgrades during the war. These modifications improved her combat capability and reflected lessons learned from battle experience. The most visible changes involved anti-aircraft armament. Enterprise commissioned in 1938 with 8 5-inch guns and minimal light anti-aircraft weapons. By 1945, the ship carried 12 5-inch guns, 11 quad 40mm mounts, and over 60 20mm guns. This massive increase in firepower reflected the kamikaze threat and the need for ships to defend themselves against aerial attack. Radar underwent similar evolution. Early war radar was primitive, capable of detecting aircraft at limited range with poor resolution. By 1945, Enterprise carried multiple radar systems providing long-range air search, surface search, height-finding capability, and fire control for anti-aircraft guns. Radar allowed the ship to detect threats at greater range, and vector fighters to intercept more effectively. Aircraft evolved dramatically during the war. Enterprise started the war operating Grumman F-4F Wildcats, Douglas SBD Dauntless, and Douglas TBD Devastators. By war's end, the ship operated Grumman F-6F Hellcats, Curtiss SB-2C Helldivers, and Grumman TBF Avengers. These later aircraft were faster, carried heavier weapons loads, and incorporated better equipment than early war types. The ship's aircraft capacity increased somewhat during the war through more efficient deck parking and operations. Enterprise nominally operated 90 aircraft, but could embark over 100 when necessary by parking aircraft densely on the flight deck and in the hangar. Communications improved substantially. Early war radio systems were limited in range and capability. By 1945, Enterprise could communicate reliably over thousands of miles, coordinate with other ships and aircraft, and receive intelligence updates in near real time. This connectivity made carriers more effective as part of larger task forces. Enterprise's record can be compared to other American carriers to appreciate her achievement. The comparison shows Enterprise's unique combination of survival, combat record, and duration of service. USS Yorktown CV-5, Enterprise's sister ship, was sunk at Midway in June 1942 after only 18 months of combat operations. Yorktown participated in Coral Sea and Midway, earning valuable combat experience, but her service was cut short. USS Hornet CV-8, third Yorktown-class carrier, was sunk at Santa Cruz in October 1942 after only 11 months of combat. Hornet participated in the Doolittle raid and Midway, but survived less than a year of war. USS Lexington CV-2 was sunk at Coral Sea in May 1942. USS Wasp CV-7 was sunk by submarine in September 1942. These carriers saw limited combat before being destroyed. The Essex-class carriers that entered service from 1943 onward were larger, faster, and better protected than Enterprise. Ships like USS Essex CV-9, USS Intrepid CV-11, and USS Lexington CV-16 achieved impressive combat records. But none matched Enterprise's combination of longevity and achievement. Essex-class ships entered combat after the war's most desperate phase, when American numerical superiority was already established. Only Enterprise survived from Pearl Harbor to war's end while participating in nearly every major battle. Only Enterprise earned 20 battle stars. The Gray Ghost record remained unmatched. Japan's surrender in August 1945 ended the Pacific War. Enterprise remained at Puget Sound Naval Shipyard, completing repairs from May Kamikaze damage. The carrier returned to Pearl Harbor in September and participated in Operation Magic Carpet, transporting servicemen from Pacific bases back to the United States. But Enterprise's future was uncertain. The Navy had dozens of carriers by war's end. Essex-class ships newer and more capable than aging Yorktown-class. The post-war drawdown required decommissioning many ships. Enterprise, despite her record, was among the oldest carriers still in service. Enterprise was placed in reserve in 1946 and decommissioned in February 1947. The carrier was berthed at Bayonne, New Jersey, with other reserve ships. Initial plans called for preservation as a museum ship, recognizing Enterprise's unique status as most decorated warship. But preservation proved difficult. Maintaining a carrier as museum required substantial funding. The ship would need berth, maintenance, staff, and visitors to sustain operations. Multiple organizations attempted to raise funds for preservation, but the required millions proved difficult to secure. Through the late 1940s and 1950s, Enterprise remained in reserve while preservation efforts continued. The carrier slowly deteriorated from lack of maintenance. Repeated proposals for museum ship status failed to secure necessary funding. The Navy grew increasingly reluctant to maintain ships in reserve that would never return to service. In 1958, the decision was made to scrap Enterprise. The carrier was sold to Lipset Corporation for $175,000, barely scrap metal value. The most decorated warship in United States naval history would be cut up and melted down. Veterans organizations and preservation advocates protested vigorously. How could America scrap the Gray Ghost, the ship that survived Pearl Harbor and won 20 battle stars, the carrier whose aircraft turned the tide at Midway? Petitions were circulated. Letters were written to Congress. Fundraising campaigns launched desperate last-minute attempts to save the ship. The protests failed. Enterprise was towed to Kearny, New Jersey, and scrapping began in July 1958. The process took over 2 years. Piece by piece, the Gray Ghost was dismantled, her steel recycled, her structure erased from existence, except for a few artifacts preserved by veterans and museums. The scrapping of Enterprise remains controversial. The ship deserved preservation alongside other historic vessels like USS Constitution, USS Missouri, USS Intrepid. Enterprise's record exceeded those ships in many respects. The failure to preserve Enterprise is widely considered one of the great losses of American naval heritage. The name Enterprise was reassigned after CV-6 scrapping. The first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, launched in 1960, was christened USS Enterprise CVN-65. This was the 8th United States Navy ship to bear the name, maintaining a tradition stretching back to the Revolutionary War. CVN-65 served for 51 years, the longest service life of any aircraft carrier. The ship participated in numerous operations during the Cold War and beyond, maintaining Enterprise's reputation for distinguished service. CVN-65 was decommissioned in 2012 and is currently being dismantled. The Navy has announced that the third Gerald R. Ford-class carrier, currently under construction, will be named USS Enterprise CVN-80. The name will continue, ensuring that Enterprise remains associated with the Navy's most capable ships. But CVN-80 cannot replace CV-6. The Gray Ghost loss as museum ship means future generations cannot walk her decks or understand her significance through direct experience. Though Enterprise herself was scrapped, various artifacts and memorials preserve her memory. The ship's bell is displayed at the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. The stern nameplate is held by the Smithsonian Institution. Various smaller items, equipment, documents, photographs, are held by museums and private collectors. The Enterprise Association, formed by veterans who served aboard CV-6, maintained contact among survivors and promoted the ship's history. The association organized reunions, published newsletters, and advocated for preservation and commemoration. Many members remained active until advanced age, determined that their ship's story would not be forgotten. Memorials to Enterprise exist at various locations. A plaque at the Navy Memorial in Washington, D.C., honors the ship and her crew. Various museums include Enterprise exhibits as part of larger Pacific War displays. The USS Hornet Museum in California maintains Enterprise exhibits, as Hornet CV-12, an Essex-class carrier, was named for the Yorktown-class Hornet CV-8 that served alongside Enterprise. Enterprise's combat record demonstrated principles that influenced naval aviation development for decades. The carrier proved that properly handled carriers could survive in combat, that damage control and crew training could overcome battle damage, and that carriers would dominate naval warfare in the age of air power. The lessons learned aboard Enterprise informed carrier design and doctrine throughout the Cold War. American carriers incorporated heavy anti-aircraft armament, redundant systems, effective damage control, and operational flexibility based partially on Enterprise's experience. The carrier's longevity demonstrated the value of robust design. Enterprise survived battles that sank other carriers not because the Yorktown class was heavily armored, it wasn't, but because the design was fundamentally sound and the crew was superbly trained. The ability to absorb damage and continue operating proved more valuable than theoretical invulnerability. Enterprise's operational tempo showed that carriers could sustain high-intensity operations for extended periods. The ship spent most of 1942 to 1945 at sea or in combat zones, returning to rear areas only for essential repairs and resupply. This operational model became standard for American carriers. Ships designed to deploy forward and remain on station for months. Beyond statistics and battle reports, Enterprise's story is fundamentally about the sailors who served aboard her. These men, officers and enlisted pilots and mechanics, gunners and cooks, kept the ship operational through years of combat. Many Enterprise veterans went on to distinguished post-war careers. They served in Korea and Vietnam. They taught at service schools, passing knowledge gained aboard Enterprise to new generations. They became community leaders, carrying lessons learned under fire into civilian life. The veterans maintained fierce pride in their ship. They knew they had served on something special. Reunions continue for decades, bringing together men who share experiences that few others could understand. As the veterans aged and died, their children and grandchildren carried on the association, determined to preserve the gray ghost memory. The scrapping of Enterprise remained painful for veterans throughout their lives. Many felt betrayed that the Navy they served couldn't preserve the ship that meant so much. The loss was personal. It was their ship, their home during the war's worst years, the vessel that carried them through battles and brought them home. If Enterprise had been preserved as a museum ship, the impact on American naval heritage would have been substantial. The ship could have been berthed in New York Harbor, San Francisco Bay, or Pearl Harbor, locations with high visitor traffic and strong connections to naval history. A preserved Enterprise would have educated millions about the Pacific War. Visitors could walk the flight deck where aircraft launched from Midway. They could have seen the hangar deck where crew fought fires after Kamikaze hits. They could have visited the island superstructure where Admiral Spruance and Admiral Halsey commanded task forces. The ship would have served as a memorial to the sailors who served aboard her. Names of those killed in action could have been displayed. Exhibits could have told individual stories of heroism, sacrifice, and service. Veterans could have brought their families to show where they served. Enterprise would have provided tangible connection to history. Modern Americans, living in security purchased by their grandparents' generation, could have experienced, at least partially, what naval combat meant. They could have understood the scale of carrier operations, the complexity of the machinery, the courage required to serve aboard ships under constant threat. The loss of this opportunity is the tragedy of Enterprise's scrapping. No amount of documentation can replace the physical presence of the ship herself. The gray ghost deserved better than the scrapyard. Several World War II carriers were preserved as museums, providing context for what could have been Enterprise's fate. These ships demonstrate the educational and memorial value that preserved Enterprise would have provided. USS Intrepid CV-11 is preserved in New York City as the Intrepid Sea, Air and Space Museum. The ship receives approximately 1 million visitors annually. Intrepid's exhibits cover naval aviation, space exploration, and the Cold War. The ship serves as working museum and event space. USS Yorktown CV-10 is preserved in Charleston, South Carolina, as Patriots Point Naval and Maritime Museum. Yorktown was named for Enterprise's sister ship CV-5 sunk at Midway. The museum includes a carrier plus other vessels and extensive exhibits on naval history. USS Lexington CV-16 is preserved in Corpus Christi, Texas. The ship serves as museum and training ship for Naval Sea Cadets. Lexington was named for CV-2 sunk at Coral Sea. USS Hornet CV-12 is preserved in Alameda, California. The ship includes exhibits on Apollo program recovery operations in addition to World War II service. All these carriers are Essex-class ships commissioned 1943 or later. All served with distinction, but none matched Enterprise's record. None survived from pre-war through war's end. None earned 20 battle stars. Yet all were preserved while Enterprise was scrapped. The irony is bitter. Lesser ships, in terms of combat record, were saved while the most decorated was lost. The decision reflected post-war economics and bureaucratic indifference rather than considered judgment about historical value. Japan never expected one carrier to survive every major Pacific battle because carrier combat was extraordinarily destructive. Carriers were vulnerable to air attack, submarines, and surface action. Most carriers that saw heavy combat were damaged or sunk within months. Carriers were weapons built for offense, not survival. But Enterprise survived. The ship participated in 18 major engagements. She was hit by bombs multiple times. She survived kamikaze attacks. She absorbed damage that sank other carriers and kept operating. Through combination of sturdy design, excellent crew, and perhaps luck, Enterprise endured from Pearl Harbor to war's end. The 20 battle stars represented recognition of unprecedented achievement. No other American warship matched Enterprise's record. The carrier's aircraft sank 71 enemy ships and destroyed over 900 aircraft. The ship's crew maintained operations under conditions that would have broken lesser crews. Enterprise proved that carriers could dominate naval warfare when properly employed and supported. The ship demonstrated that damage control and training could overcome technological limitations. Enterprise showed that one ship with exceptional crew could accomplish more than multiple ships with mediocre crews. The tragedy of Enterprise's scrapping diminishes but doesn't erase her significance. The physical ship is gone, melted down decades ago, but the story remains. The veterans' memories, though fading as the last survivors pass away, were recorded and preserved. The official records document every action. The photographs capture moments frozen in time. From Midway's turning point to Philippine Sea's turkey shoot, from Pearl Harbor's escape to Okinawa's kamikazes, from Pacific Dawn to Pacific Victory, Enterprise fought and prevailed. The gray ghost that Japan claimed sunk multiple times but kept returning. The carrier that earned more decorations than any other American warship. The ship that proved carriers would dominate naval warfare for generations to come. 20 battle stars. 71 enemy ships sunk. 911 enemy aircraft destroyed. 500 crew casualties endured. For years of continuous combat operations completed. One carrier that survived when all her sisters were lost. USS Enterprise CV-6. The most decorated warship in United States naval history. The gray ghost that deserved preservation but received scrapping. The ship whose story must be remembered even though the ship herself is gone.